He wasn't hungry, he was remembering something he thought he'd buried forever. The soft hum of a roadside diner filled the air, plates clinking, coffee pouring, neon lights flickering faintly against the rain-streaked windows, the kind of place people passed by without a second glance. But tonight, Ethan Carter stepped inside like it was the only place in the world that mattered, his polished shoes slightly out of place against the worn black and white tiles, his tailored coat catching the attention of no one except the girl behind the counter who looked up just long enough to notice that he didn't belong here, not really, not with the quiet confidence he carried all the way his eyes scanned the room like he was searching for something that couldn't be seen. Lily Brooks wiped her hands on her apron and approached with a small, practiced smile, the kind that came from long shifts and longer days. "Table for one?" she asked softly, and Ethan nodded, sliding into a booth by the window where the vinyl seat creaked under him, his fingers brushing lightly over the edge of the menu as if it held more than just food options. Lily handed him a glass of water, noticing the subtle pause in his movement when he opened the menu, his gaze settling not at the center, not at the highlighted specials, but at the very bottom corner where the cheapest item sat quietly ignored. "I'll take the grilled cheese," he said. After a moment, his voice calm but distant, and Lily blinked slightly, not because of what he ordered, but because of how he said it, like it meant something more than it should. "Just the sandwich?" she asked gently, not judging, just making sure, and he nodded again, offering a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just that," he replied, and Lily wrote it down, but something about him lingered in her mind as she walked away. It wasn't pity she felt, and it wasn't curiosity alone, it was something quieter, something instinctive, like recognizing a kind of tired she'd seen before, back behind the counter. She glanced at him again, noticing the way he sat perfectly still, hands folded, not checking his phone, not looking around, just existing, as if this moment mattered more than anything else in his day. She moved to prepare the order, but halfway through, she hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the fridge, then back to the plate, and without saying a word to anyone, she added a small side of fries, nothing fancy, just enough to make the meal feel complete. When she returned, she set the plate down gently. "On the house," she said quietly before he could question it. "You looked like you might need a little extra tonight." Ethan's hand paused mid-motion, his eyes lifting to meet hers for the first time, really meeting hers, and for a brief second, something shifted, something unguarded, something real. "I didn't order this," he said, not rejecting, just surprised, and Lily shrugged lightly, a small smile playing on her lips. "I know," she replied, "but sometimes the cheapest thing on the menu isn't what people actually need." The words hung there, simple but heavier than they should have been, and Ethan let out a quiet breath, leaning back slightly as if her kindness had caught him off guard in a way he hadn't prepared for. He looked down at the plate again, at the sandwich, at the fries, and for a moment, the diner faded, the noise softened, and all that remained was a memory he hadn't planned on revisiting tonight. But somehow, without knowing who he was, without asking for anything in return, the girl standing in front of him had just stepped into it like she belonged there all along. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Carter didn't feel like a billionaire sitting in a forgotten diner, he felt like a man being seen. Ethan did not touch the food right away, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the plate as if he needed a moment to convince himself this was real, the warmth rising from the grilled cheese carrying a faint, familiar scent that pulled at something deep inside him, something older than his company, older than the tailored suits and the penthouse views, something from a time when a $10 bill could decide whether he ate or went to bed hungry. He picked up the sandwich slowly, taking a bite, and for a brief second his eyes closed, not dramatically, not intentionally, just enough for the memory to slip through. Lily noticed from across the counter, not staring, just observing the way someone does when they care a little more than their job requires. She poured coffee for another table, wiped down a surface that was already clean, but her attention kept drifting back to him. There was something unusual about a man who sat that still, who did not scroll through his phone or rush through his meal, who ate like every bite had weight to it. After a few minutes she walked back over, topping off his water without asking. "Everything okay?" she said softly, and Ethan nodded, swallowing before he spoke. "Yeah, it is." His voice was quieter now, less guarded, and she gave a small nod as if that was all she needed to hear. But before she turned away, he added, "This place, has it been here long?" Lily leaned slightly against the booth, glancing around for a second. "About 20 years, give or take," she said, My mom used to bring me here when I was a kid, back when a grilled cheese was $2 and came with a soda." She smiled faintly at the memory, and something about that detail made Ethan look up again, more focused this time. $2, he repeated under his breath, almost like he was testing the number against his own past. Lily noticed the shift, the way his expression changed just slightly, and she tilted her head, curious but careful. "You okay?" she asked again, and this time he let out a quiet breath. "Yeah, it just reminds me of somewhere I used to go," he said, not offering more, but not closing off either. Lily nodded, respecting the boundary, but something in her softened. "Food has a way of doing that," she said gently, "bringing things back whether you want it to or not." Ethan gave a small, almost surprised smile at that, like he had not expected her to understand, like he had not expected anyone here to understand, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them not awkward, just real. A bell rang near the kitchen, snapping Lily back into motion. "I should get back," she said, straightening up, but before she walked away, she added quietly, "If you want, I can pack up the rest for later, no charge." Ethan glanced down at the plate, still more than half untouched, and then back at her. "I might take you up on that," he said, and she smiled, a little brighter this time. Before heading off, the rest of the night moved on like any other. Orders called out, plates served, tips counted, but something had shifted in that small booth by the window. Ethan stayed longer than most customers, not because he had nowhere to go, but because for once, he did not feel the need to rush back to the life waiting for him outside. When he finally stood, reaching into his pocket, he placed a few bills on the table, not excessive, not flashy, just enough, and as he walked toward the door, Lily called out softly, "Hey." He turned, pausing just long enough. "We close at 10, if you ever come back," she said, trying to sound casual, and Ethan gave a small nod, his hand resting on the door handle. "I will," he replied. And then he stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting his face, but the warmth of that simple meal, and the girl who had given him more than he asked for, stayed with him long after the diner lights faded behind him. The next evening, the rain had cleared, leaving the streets damp and reflecting the glow of passing headlights, and just a few minutes past 7, the bell above the diner door rang again, softer this time, almost familiar. Lily looked up from the counter out of habit, expecting another regular, another tired face at the end of a long day, but instead she saw him, the same coat, the same quiet presence. Ethan Carter stepping inside like he had not quite decided if he belonged there but came. Anyway, her lips curved slightly before she could stop herself. "Back already?" she called out, half teasing, half surprised, and Ethan paused for just a second before answering. "Guess I like the food," he said, though the way his eyes met hers suggested it was not just that. Lily grabbed a menu but did not hand it to him this time. "You already know what you are getting?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, and Ethan gave a small nod, sliding into the same booth by the window. "Yeah, I think I do," he replied, his voice carrying a little more certainty tonight. Lily scribbled the order without asking, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Grilled cheese again," she guessed, and he let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Yeah," he admitted, and this time there was no hesitation in it, no distance, just something steady. Lily walked back to the kitchen, but not before glancing over her shoulder, noticing the way he looked around again, slower this time. Like he was taking it in, like the place itself mattered, not just the memory tied to it. A few minutes later she returned, setting the plate down in front of him, and again, without a word, there were fries on the side. He noticed immediately, his eyes flicking up to hers. "You keep doing that," he said, not accusing, just pointing it out, and Lily shrugged lightly. "You keep coming back," she replied, as if that explained everything. Ethan smiled faintly, but instead of picking up the sandwich right away, he looked at her for a moment longer. "Do you ever get tired of this?" he asked suddenly, and Lily blinked, caught off guard. "Of what?" she said, and he gestured around the diner. Same orders, same people, same routine every day. His tone was not judgmental, just curious, like he genuinely wanted to understand. Lily leaned her hip against the booth, thinking for a second before answering. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not in the way you think." Ethan tilted his head slightly, waiting, and she continued, "It is not the routine that gets to you, it is when people stop seeing each other, when it all becomes automatic." She glanced toward another table where a man barely looked up from his phone as his food was set down. "That part, that gets old." Ethan followed her gaze, then looked back at her, something thoughtful settling in his expression. "So you try to see people," he said quietly, and Lily nodded, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Yeah. Even when they do not expect it," she replied, her words landing softly but firmly. Ethan let that sit for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the table, not restless, just thinking. "And what about you?" Lily asked suddenly, crossing her arms lightly. "Do you ever get tired of your routine?" Ethan almost answered automatically, almost gave the kind of response he was used to giving, something polished, something safe, but instead he paused, really paused, and for the first time, the answer that came out was honest. "Yeah," he said quietly, "more than I thought I would." Lily studied him for a second, like she was trying to decide whether to push further or let it go, and then she smiled, softer this time. "Well, at least now you have a place to break it," she said, tapping the edge of the table lightly before stepping away, leaving him with the plate, the warmth, and a conversation that lingered longer than the meal itself. And as Ethan picked up the sandwich again, taking another bite, he realized something that unsettled him in the best possible way. He was not coming back here to remember anymore. He was coming back because for a few quiet moments, in a small diner most people ignored, he felt like he could finally breathe again. By the fourth night, it was no longer a coincidence, and it was definitely not about the food. The bell above the diner door rang just after sunset, and Lily did not even need to look up to know it was him. There was a rhythm to the way he entered now, quiet but certain, like someone returning to a place that had started to feel familiar. "You are becoming a regular," she said as she grabbed a clean glass, her tone light but observant. And Ethan gave a small shrug as he slid into his usual booth. "I did not think that was a bad thing," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of ease that had not been there the first night. Lily set the water down in front of him, already reaching for her notepad. "Let me guess," she said, tapping the pen against the paper. "Grilled cheese," and Ethan almost smiled before nodding. "Yeah," he said, then after a brief pause, "and coffee." Lily raised an eyebrow slightly, writing it down. "Big change," she teased, and he let out a quiet breath that sounded closer to a laugh this time. "Trying something new," he said, though the words felt like they meant more than just the drink. As she walked away, Ethan leaned back slightly, watching the place move around him, the same clinking plates, the same low conversations, but tonight it felt different, or maybe he was the one who had changed. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, then again, persistent, but he ignored it, letting the moment stay intact. Lily returned with the coffee first, setting it down carefully. "Careful, it is hot," she said, and he nodded, wrapping his hands around the mug like he needed the warmth. "Thanks," he replied, his gaze drifting to the steam rising between them. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly, the question coming out more direct than he expected. Lily paused mid-step, turning back to him with a slight tilt of her head. "Leaving," she echoed, and he nodded. "This place, this job, all of it," he clarified. Lily leaned against the booth again, considering the question, not brushing it off, not answering too quickly. "Yeah," she admitted after a moment. "Sometimes I think about it." Her eyes shifted briefly toward the window, the street beyond, but thinking and doing are two different things. Ethan watched her closely, sensing there was more beneath that answer. "What is stopping you?" he asked, and Lily gave a small, almost amused smile. "Life," she said simply, then added, "Rent, bills, taking care of my mom, you know, the usual." Ethan nodded slowly, the word usual landing heavier than it should have, because for him, nothing about that life had been usual for a long time. "What would you do if you could leave?" he asked, his tone softer now, and Lily looked down at the table for a second, her fingers tracing the edge of the worn surface before she answered. "I would open my own place," she said, almost like she was saying it to herself, not something fancy, just somewhere people feel like they matter when they walk in. Ethan felt something shift again, that quiet pull he had not expected. "Sounds a lot like this place," he said, glancing around, and Lily shook her head slightly. "No. This place survives," she replied, her voice steady. "Mine would mean something." The honesty in that statement hung between them, unpolished, real. Ethan held her gaze for a second longer than usual, then nodded once, like he understood more than he let on. The bell rang again as new customers entered, breaking the moment. Lily straightened up, stepping back into her role. "I will get your food," she said, her tone returning to normal, but her eyes lingered just a second before she turned away. When she came back with the plate, the fries were there again. Of course they were, and this time Ethan did not question it. He just looked up at her and said quietly, You always give more than people ask for, Lily shrugged lightly, placing the plate down. Maybe people should start asking for less, she replied, and as she walked away, Ethan picked up the sandwich, but his thoughts were no longer on the food, they were on her words, her dream, and for the first time in a long time, the man who had everything realized there was still something he did not understand, something he wanted to learn, not from boardrooms or numbers, but from a waitress in a small diner who somehow saw more than anyone else ever had. On the fifth night, the air inside the diner felt warmer than usual, not because of the temperature, but because something unspoken had settled into a quiet rhythm between them. The bell chimed and Ethan walked in right on time, like a man who had built his entire life around precision yet now found himself drawn to something unpredictable. Lily glanced up and this time she did not hide the small smile that formed. "You are consistent, I will give you that," she said as she grabbed a fresh mug. And Ethan slid into his booth, loosening his coat slightly as if he planned to stay longer. "It is one of my better qualities," he replied, though his tone carried a hint of something lighter, less guarded than before. Lily poured his coffee before he even asked, setting it down in front of him like it was part of an unspoken agreement. "Now, grilled cheese?" she asked, already writing it down, and Ethan nodded, but then added, "And whatever you would recommend." Lily paused, her pen hovering midair, surprised. "You trust my judgment now?" she asked, a slight tease in her voice, and Ethan met her eyes, steady. "I think I do," he said, and something about the way he said it made her look at him a second longer before she nodded and walked away. In the kitchen she hesitated for a moment, then decided, adding a simple bowl of tomato soup to the order. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy, just something that paired well, something that felt right. When she brought it out, Ethan looked at the extra dish, then up at her. "This was not on the menu special," he said, and Lily shrugged lightly. "It should be," she replied, placing it down. "Trust me." Ethan let out a soft breath, almost amused. "I am starting to," he said, and for a moment neither of them moved, the quiet stretching between them in a way that felt comfortable, real. Lily stepped back, giving him space, but her eyes lingered just a second before she turned away. The diner moved around them like always, orders called, laughter from a booth in the corner, the steady hum of a place that had seen years of stories come and go, but Ethan stayed focused on the table in front of him. The sandwich, the soup, the simplicity of it all, and for once, he did not feel the need to analyze or control anything. He simply picked up the spoon, taking a bite, and something about the warmth of it, the familiarity, settled deeper than he expected. Halfway through the meal, his phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen, a name flashing that clearly belonged to another world. One filled with meetings and decisions and expectations. He stared at it for a second, then, without answering, he turned the phone face down on the table, choosing silence instead. Lily noticed from across the room, not the name, not the details, just the choice, and something about that made her pause. When she walked back over to refill his coffee, she nodded toward the phone. "You can take it if it is important," she said casually, and Ethan shook his head without hesitation. "It can wait," he replied, and Lily studied him for a moment, as if weighing that answer. "Most people do not say that," she said quietly, and Ethan looked up at her, his expression more open than it had been the first night. "Most people do not get a reason to," he answered, the words landing softly but carrying weight. Lily did not respond right away. Instead she leaned lightly against the booth again, arms crossed loosely. "So this is your reason?" she asked, half curious, half cautious, and Ethan hesitated, not because he did not have an answer, but because he was not used to saying it out loud. "It might be," he said finally, his voice steady but quieter than before. Lily held his gaze for a second longer, then gave a small nod, like she accepted that without needing more. "Then I guess I should not mess that up," she said lightly, pushing off the booth, but as she turned to leave, Ethan spoke again, stopping her. "You would not," he said, and there was something certain in that statement, something that made Lily pause just slightly before continuing on, leaving him with the rest of his meal and a realization he had not planned on facing. This was no longer just about a memory or a break from routine. This was something else entirely, something he did not fully understand yet, but for the first time in a long time, he was not trying to control it, he was letting it happen, one quiet night at a time. On the sixth night, something felt different before Ethan even stepped through the door, not in the diner itself, not in the hum of conversation or the soft glow of the lights, but in the quiet tension that seemed to sit just beneath the surface. Lily was already moving faster than usual, her steps a little sharper, her smile still there but thinner, like she was holding something back. The bell rang and Ethan entered, brushing a bit of cool air in with him. And for the first time since he started coming, she did not look up right away. He noticed immediately. The shift was subtle but undeniable, and as he made his way to the booth, he glanced toward the counter, watching her finish taking an order before finally meeting his eyes. "Hey," she said, her tone polite but more distant than before, and Ethan nodded, sliding into his seat. "Hey," he replied, studying her for a moment before adding, "Everything okay?" Lily gave a quick nod, already reaching for the notepad. "Yeah, just busy," she said, though the diner was no more crowded than usual. Ethan did not push. "Not yet, same order?" she asked, and he hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yeah, same," he said, and she wrote it down without the usual pause, without the small conversation that had become routine between them. When she walked away, Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze following her, something unsettled forming in his chest, not confusion exactly, but awareness, like something had shifted and he had not been there to see it happen. A few minutes later, as he waited, a man in a dark suit stepped inside. Out of place in the diner in a way that mirrored Ethan's first night, the man scanned the room quickly, then walked directly toward Ethan's booth. "Mr. Carter," he said under his breath, careful but firm, and Ethan's expression tightened almost instantly, the ease from the past few nights slipping just enough to reveal the world he had been keeping outside. "Not here," Ethan replied quietly, his voice controlled, but the man continued, "It is urgent. The board needs." Ethan cut him off with a sharp glance. "I said not here," he repeated, more firmly this time. The man hesitated, then nodded, stepping back, but not before Lily, passing by with a tray, caught just enough of the exchange to notice the shift in tone, the name, the way the man carried himself. She did not stop, did not react outwardly, but her eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan before she continued on. The pieces did not fully fall into place yet, but something in her expression changed, something more guarded. When she returned with Ethan's order, she set the plate down carefully, the fries still there, the soup still warm, but her movements were quieter now, more deliberate. Ethan looked up at her, sensing it immediately. "You heard that," he said, not accusing, just stating it. Lily hesitated for a fraction of a second before meeting his gaze. "I heard enough," she replied, her voice calm but no longer as open as before. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand lightly over the edge of the table. "It is not what it sounds like," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how weak they sounded. Lily gave a small, almost knowing smile, but it did not reach her eyes. "It never is," she said softly. And for the first time since they met, there was distance between them that no amount of kindness could immediately close. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "Lily, I was going to tell you," he began, but she shook her head gently, stopping him before he could continue. "You do not owe me an explanation," she said, straightening up. "You are a customer, that is all." The words were polite, professional, but they landed heavier than anything she had said before. Ethan felt it. The shift from something real back to something surface level, and it unsettled him more than he expected. "That is not what this is," he said quietly, and Lily paused, just for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the back of the booth. "Then what is it?" she asked, her voice steady but searching. Ethan opened his mouth, ready to answer, but for the first time in a long time, he did not have one that felt honest enough, and that silence, that hesitation, said more than any explanation could. Lily nodded once, like she understood more than he had said, then stepped back, returning to her work, leaving Ethan alone at the table, the food in front of him untouched, the warmth of the diner still there but no longer reaching him the same way. And for the first time since he walked into this place, he realized something he had not prepared for. Kindness was easy to accept, but trust was something he might have already started to lose. The diner felt colder that night, not because the temperature had changed, but because something invisible had shifted between them. Ethan sat there longer than usual, the grilled cheese untouched, the soup cooling slowly, his thoughts louder than the clinking plates around him. He replayed the moment over and over, the way Lily's voice had changed, the way her eyes had pulled back just enough to remind him that whatever this had been, it was fragile, and he had just cracked it without meaning to. Across the room, Lily moved like she always did, efficient, polite, steady, but there was a precision to her now, a careful distance she placed between herself and his table. She still checked on him, still refilled his water, but the small pauses were gone, the quiet conversations replaced with simple, professional exchanges. "Do you need anything else?" she asked at one point, her tone neutral, and Ethan looked up at her, searching for something familiar. "No. I am good," he replied, though it was clear he was not. She nodded and turned away before the silence could stretch any further, leaving him alone with the realization that whatever connection they had built over the past few nights was now hanging by a thread he did not know how to hold on to. He finally pushed the plate aside, standing up slowly, not ready to leave but unsure how to stay. As he walked toward the counter to pay, Lily was already there, organizing receipts, her focus fixed downward until she sensed him approach. "I will take care of it here," she said, reaching for the register, her voice steady, controlled. Ethan hesitated for a second, then placed his card on the counter, watching her as she processed the payment. "Lily," he said quietly, and she paused just slightly before looking up. "Yeah," she responded, her expression composed but guarded. Ethan exhaled slowly, choosing his words more carefully than he had in a long time. "I did not come here to lie to you," he said, and Lily held his gaze, listening but not softening yet. "Then why did you?" she asked, her question simple but direct. Ethan looked down for a moment, then back at her. "Because I did not want you to treat me differently," he admitted, the honesty in his voice unmistakable. Lily studied him for a second, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the counter. "You mean like everyone else does?" she said, and Ethan nodded once. "Yeah," he replied, "exactly like that." Lily let out a small breath, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, but the distance was still there. "So instead, you decided to just not say anything," she said, not accusing, just stating it, and Ethan did not argue. "I guess I did," he admitted. Lily glanced down at the receipt, then back up at him, her expression thoughtful now, conflicted in a way she could not quite hide. "You know what the problem is," she said quietly, and Ethan waited. "It is not that you are rich," she continued, her voice steady. "It is that you decided for me how I would react." The words landed softly but firmly, and Ethan felt them settle deeper than anything else she had said. Because she was right, he had made that choice for her without even realizing it. He ran a hand lightly through his hair, exhaling. "I did not think of it that way," he said honestly, and Lily gave a small nod, like she believed him, but that did not erase what had already happened. "Most people do not," she replied, her tone gentler now but still careful. A brief silence passed between them, not as easy as before, but not completely closed either. Ethan picked up the receipt, glancing at it for a second before setting it back down. "I am not asking you to see me any differently," he said quietly. "I just did not want to lose this." Lily's eyes flicked up at that, something shifting again, smaller this time, more subtle, but real. "This," she repeated softly, and Ethan nodded. "Yeah, this place, these conversations. The way you see people," he said, and for the first time since the tension began, Lily's expression softened just slightly, not fully, not completely, but enough to show that the connection was not entirely gone. She leaned lightly against the counter, considering his words. "You did not lose it," she said after a moment, her voice quieter now. "You just made it a little harder." Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, a faint, relieved smile touching his lips. "I can work with that," he said, and Lily almost smiled back, almost, before stepping away to help another customer, leaving Ethan standing there, not fixed, not forgiven, but not completely shut out either. And as he walked toward the door, he realized something important. This was not a moment he could control or solve quickly. This was something he would have to earn, slowly, honestly, one night at a time. Just like everything else that had started to matter in this small diner he never expected to need. The next night, Ethan did not arrive at 7, and he did not arrive at 8. For the first time since he had stepped into the diner, his booth by the window sat empty, untouched, and Lily noticed. Not immediately, not in a way she would admit, but in the small pauses between orders, in the moments her eyes drifted toward the door without reason. She told herself it did not matter, that customers came and went all the time, that routines changed, but when 9 o'clock passed and the bell still had not rung for him, something quiet settled in her chest, something she chose not to name. She wiped down the same counter twice, refilled napkin holders that did not need refilling, and when her coworker asked if she was okay, she simply nodded. "Just a long shift," she said, even though the hours felt heavier than usual. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting soft reflections against the glass, and inside, the diner carried on like it always did, but without that one familiar presence. It felt slightly off, slightly incomplete. Ethan, on the other hand, sat in a very different kind of room, the lights brighter, the air colder, A long table surrounded by people waiting for answers, decisions, direction, his name spoken with authority, expectation, pressure. "We need your approval on this," someone said, sliding a document toward him, and Ethan glanced at it, but the numbers blurred for a second, his mind drifting somewhere else entirely, somewhere quieter, somewhere simpler. "Mr. Carter," the voice pulled him back, and he blinked, straightening slightly. "I will review it," he said, his tone controlled, professional, but there was a delay now, a hesitation that had not been there before. The meeting continued, voices overlapping, plans unfolding, but Ethan found himself checking the time more than once, calculating how long it would take to get across town, wondering if the diner would still be open, wondering if she would still be there, and for the first time in a long time, the weight of his world felt heavier than it should have, not because of the responsibility, but because of what it was keeping him from. Back at the diner, Lily was stacking chairs on the far side of the room, the signal that closing time was near. When the bell finally rang, sharp against the quiet, she froze for just a fraction of a second before turning, and there he was. Slightly out of breath, his coat still on, like he had not bothered to slow down before coming in. "You are late," she said, her tone light but carrying something underneath it, and Ethan let out a small breath, almost a laugh. "Yeah. I know," he admitted, stepping inside as the door closed behind him, the cool air following. Lily glanced at the clock, then back at him. "We close in 10 minutes, she said, and Ethan nodded. "That is all I need," he replied, and something about the way he said it made her pause. She grabbed a menu out of habit, but he gently shook his head. "Same thing," he said, and she hesitated for a second before nodding, heading to the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned with the plate, no extra words, just the familiar meal set in front of him, but this time, there were no fries, no soup, just the sandwich, simple, plain, exactly as ordered. Ethan noticed immediately, his eyes lifting to hers, but he did not comment, not yet. He picked up the sandwich, taking a bite, and for a moment, the silence between them stretched, different from before, heavier, more deliberate. Lily stood a few steps away, arms loosely crossed, watching without watching, and finally, Ethan set the sandwich down. Looking up at her, "I deserved that," he said quietly, nodding toward the plate. Lily's lips pressed together slightly, but there was no sharpness in her expression, just honesty. "You said you wanted me to treat you like everyone else," she replied, and Ethan nodded slowly, accepting it. "Yeah. I did," he said, then after a brief pause, "but I also said I did not want to lose this." Lily held his gaze, something shifting again, not back to where it was, but not as distant as before. "Then do not," she said simply, and the words hung there, not dramatic, not grand, just real. Ethan let out a quiet breath, leaning back slightly as he looked at her. "I am trying," he said, and Lily studied him for a moment longer before giving a small nod, like she believed that much at least. The clock ticked closer to closing, the lights dimming slightly as the last customers left, and for those final minutes, nothing else was said, but something important had happened. Not a resolution, not a perfect fix, but a step, small and quiet, in the right direction. And as Ethan finished the last bite, standing up to leave, he realized something that mattered more than anything waiting for him outside. This was no longer just a place he came to escape, it was a place he was choosing to fight for, even if it meant starting over, even if it meant earning every bit of it from the beginning again. The next morning, the diner looked the same from the outside, the same faded sign, the same quiet street, but inside, something was about to change. Lily arrived early, like she always did, unlocking the door and stepping into the familiar hum of refrigerators and the faint smell of coffee grounds. She tied her apron, moving through her routine without thinking, but when she reached the front counter, she paused. Something was different. There on the counter, neatly placed, was an envelope with her name written across the front in clean, deliberate handwriting. She frowned slightly, glancing around as if someone might still be there, but the place was empty, just the soft buzz of the overhead lights filling the silence. Slowly, she picked it up, turning it over in her hands before opening it. Inside was a single folded letter and something else, something thicker. She unfolded the letter first, her eye scanning the words as her expression shifted, not to shock, not to disbelief, but to something quieter, something deeper. "Lily, I realized something the night you stopped adding fries to my plate. You were not punishing me, you were showing me what I asked for. Honesty, no extras, no assumptions, just truth. And the truth is, I do not want to be treated like everyone else. I want to be treated like someone who is trying, and I want to earn that, not buy it, not expect it, earn it. You said your place would mean something. So this is not a gift, it is an opportunity, if you want it. Lily's hands tightened slightly around the paper as she lowered it, her eye shifting to the second item in the envelope, a set of documents, official, detailed. She flipped through them slowly, her breath catching just slightly as the realization settled. In the diner, this place was being transferred, not to Ethan, not to some corporation, but into a foundation, one that listed her name as the operating partner, her name, not as an employee, not as a waitress, but as someone with a say, someone with a future tied to it. She stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of it settling in, not overwhelming, but real. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she turned to see the owner, Mr. Daniels, walking in, his usual tired expression softened just slightly. I was wondering when you would find that, he said, and Lily blinked, still holding the papers. You knew about this, she asked, and he nodded, leaning against the counter. Met with him yesterday, he admitted. Kid is persistent, I will give him that. Did not try to buy me out, not really, just made me an offer that made sense. Lily looked back down at the documents, her mind racing. And you agreed, she asked, and Mr. Daniels shrugged lightly. Place has been hanging on for years, you know that, but he did not want to change it, said it should stay exactly what it is, just better. Lily let out a slow breath, her fingers brushing over her name again, as if making sure it was real. The bell above the door rang, and she looked up, her heart skipping just slightly before she could stop it. Ethan stepped inside, not in a suit this time, not in anything that set him apart, just himself. He stopped a few feet in, watching her, giving her space. You read it, he said quietly, and Lily nodded, her grip tightening slightly on the papers. You cannot just do this, she said, her voice steady but filled with something more than confusion. Ethan stepped closer, but not too close. I did not, he replied, I offered it. Lily held his gaze, searching his expression for anything that felt like control, like expectation, but there was none, just sincerity, just patience. Why? She asked. The simplest question, but the most important one. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hands resting loosely at his sides. Because you were right, he said. You do not need someone to save you, you just need a chance to build what you already believe in. The words landed softly, but they carried everything he had not been able to say before. Lily looked down at the papers again, then back at him, her expression shifting, not fully resolved, not instantly accepting, but open in a way it had not been since the truth came out. And what happens if I say no? She asked, testing the moment. Ethan gave a small, almost relieved smile. Then nothing changes, he said. I will still come in, order the cheapest thing on the menu, and try to earn my place here. Lily let out a quiet breath, something in her finally easing, just slightly. She folded the papers carefully, setting them down on the counter, then looked back at him, her eyes steady. Then maybe you should sit down, she said, her tone softer now, because I am not done deciding yet. Ethan nodded, a faint smile touching his lips as he moved toward the booth, and this time, when Lily brought out the plate, there were fries on the side again, simple, familiar, but carrying a meaning neither of them needed to say out loud. And as he looked up at her, something unspoken passed between them, not a perfect ending, not a final answer, but a beginning, honest, earned, and real.